Right. So I mentioned this earlier. Down on the southern border in about 2006, I got to go down there with Governor Matt Blunt, and he got to tour a couple of outposts that were set up with Missouri National Guard members trying to help the Border Patrol. My impression of it at the time was that it wasn't very effective because they weren't allowed to do anything. They basically stayed in camp with a pair of binoculars. That was about it. But now they've authorized up to 4,000 troops at the border, and many of them are starting to arrive there even now. Eben Brown from Fox News Radio is joining us, and he's covering this story today. Eben, how are you?
Good afternoon. How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you. So the first troops, are they in place now?
Well, yeah, they started arriving over the weekend, and many of the states that have a border with Mexico have taken it upon themselves to hurry up and dispatch some already. So Texas, and I was in McAllen, Texas for a few days, which is across the Mexican border from Reynosa. But Texas had put a few hundred already down to the border of the different sectors. New Mexico is doing the same thing for Arizona. California hasn't announced what they'll do. But the president is authorizing an operation, essentially, and that means federal dollars will come in to pay for these troops. And Texas has already pledged 1,000 of its own National Guard soldiers to go work the border. So
okay.
It's a significant number of troops, but what they will be doing is really probably something that'll be invisible. They are not allowed by law to actually guard the border. The border is a law enforcement operation, and we don't use the military for that. But as you're probably well aware, in many states, we often use our National Guard as an instant workforce. Think about every time we have a weather disaster, whether it's a nor'easter or a hurricane, we bring out the National Guard to help with everything. And that's essentially what's happening here. The National Guard will be used to do administrative work, to do surveillance work, to do a lot of the things that a lot of the border agents are tied up doing, and that prevents them from being out actually on the border. So the hope is that these soldiers can free up those agents so those agents can do the job of standing on the border, making those sweeps up and down the fencing, and try to interdict a lot more of the illicit crossings.
Yeah. So that's good to know. I mean, there were two different laws the president could use or powers to put troops on the border. One of them, had he declared some sort of national security emergency, they would have had a little more flexibility, correct?
See, the purpose of our soldiers, whether it's the standing military or the National Guard or, the Coast Guard or Air National Guard, whatever, is to defend the nation.
Right.
So the only legally appropriate time to actually have armed troops on the border would be to repel another armed troop on the border coming from the other side. That's not happening. So we really are not going to have that. You, like I said, these folks will likely be invisible to the general public. You will not see camouflaged armed soldiers either on the border or at the crossing gates or anything like that. This is intended to free up the Border Patrol agents to do the work of Border Patrol agents.
Okay, and in terms of California, and maybe you mentioned this and I overlooked it, but I know they've refused to cooperate, but the president could take National Guard troops from a different state and place them in California, could he not?
He could. He could try anyway. Would there be a legal challenge to that? I'm pretty sure there would be. Yeah. People, we have this thing in our country. It's sort of ingrained in our culture. We don't like the government using soldiers and sticking them in our business. That's an old states' rights thing going back to the founding of our nation. But if they are working in for instance, if it's a Missouri Guard and he's putting them in California and they're not doing combat work, I don't know if there can be that much opposition to that.
Yeah.
But, I'm sure there'll be a challenge. Absolutely.
Yeah, that's probably what they're looking for. Listen, I appreciate your time. Eben Brown with Fox News Radio, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
You bet. Yeah, thanks for the update. I was interested in that because, as I mentioned, I think last week, I got to go down there and cover this story. And if you missed that, just let me recap a little bit. The story's still up on our website, 971talk.com/Cox. Go there and look at it. I reposted the video story that I shot down there. It's only about 90 seconds long. but some of these shots are aerial shots from a Huey helicopter. We got to fly with the military along the southern border, and it's we don't have anything really comparable around here because part of it's desert, but there is literally just a bunch of sand and tumbleweeds between Mexico and the United States in the Yuma sector. There's not even something simple like a chicken wire fence. There's nothing. And basically, even though there's no cover, in the darkness, people could just walk right across that field. It's probably the length of 3 football fields. They walk right across that field from a highway in Mexico to a highway in the U.S., in the Yuma sector. And then if they can evade the Border Patrol, who doesn't have enough people to cover that entire expanse, then they're free to go. Now, our troops had, I guess, night vision goggles, and they had binoculars. Their job was to stay in their encampment with camos spread over top of them to block the sun and scan the border. And if they saw anybody, all they could do was pick up their phone, call Border Patrol, and hope that they got there in time. Even if they were attacked by some of these dangerous coyotes or drug runners that they have out there, the coyotes are the nickname for the people that bring people illegally across the border. They're all armed. They wouldn't be able to engage, even if they were fired upon, I don't think. So, it's certainly not a long-term solution, but it's a start. Hey, Paul, thank you for the call. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mark, love your program.
Thank you.
Pick up 3 hours in the morning.
Oh, thank you.
But, they definitely should have more than just an administrative role in observing. I mean, that's our soldiers. Their job is to defend our nation. And you can't say there's not arms coming across. I mean, drugs are considered a form. That's a major problem in our country besides the immigration. We need to use them for what they're for, and that's to defend our country. If they have to engage, they have to engage. They're well-trained to do that.
Well, I think that, posse comitatus, or whatever they keep bringing up, refers to the use of U.S. troops against American citizens. That's not what we're talking about here. I think the president would have it well within his authority to use some members of either the National Guard or the U.S. military to patrol parts of the southern border.
And let's face it, if you light up a few people are going to think twice about crossing.
Oh, yeah, I don't. Hopefully that wouldn't happen. But you would think that if they got fired on, they would at least have the possibility of defending themselves.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And,
all right.
You can't tie their hands on the border like that. You can't.
I'm with you. Yeah. Thank you very much, Paul.
Thanks,
when I was down there, our troops who were there, the Missouri National Guard troops, one of them's from out in Bourbon. There were a few from the St. Louis area. They weren't allowed to have the magazines in their guns. It was like Barney Fife stuff. Now, I mean, not that I want them down there shooting the place up. Don't get me wrong. But they're soldiers. I don't know. Hey, Rob, you're on the radio. Thank you.
Hey, Mark. Love your program.
Thank you.
I have a question. Since the National Guard's down there, they said they don't have a power of arrest. That's against the U.S. citizens. These people coming across are not citizens of the United States.
Yeah.
So what's the difference between that and an enemy soldier walking across? So that means an enemy soldier from a different country could just walk across the border and they can't arrest them? So what's the difference between them and a civilian non-conscript?
Mm-hmm.
So,
good. That's a good question.
I think that's kind of like, if they're going to, be down on the border, they should be able to arrest them, and because they're not U.S. citizens. They're not from our country. They are not protected under the Constitution. They're invading our country.
I need to get the people from either a fair or the Center for Immigration Studies on here to ask that question. I don't know if they would.
Simple question.
Yeah.
What's the difference? The flip test is, what's the difference like for a Mexican national soldier from walking across into our country?
That's good.
What's the difference between them and a citizen? They're both non-country, no patriots walking across their borders. Why doesn't the National Guard have the right? They should do under international law.
Yeah. Rob, thank you for making that point. It's a good one. Yep, I hadn't thought about that, but it's, the point Eben was making is that they can't go down there and, do enforcement action, but why? They're not U.S. citizens. That's kind of the point. You shouldn't be here. Here's somebody with a gun. We're going to stop you. It makes